Hello everyone, welcome to day 4 of our Java coding lessons. We will be looking at functions today. And all it is again, if you remember at the very beginning, it's just taking inputs and outputs. That's the point of code and that's the point of functions. So again, what is a function? It's something that takes an input, does something with that input and produces an output. Now it's used to simplify but also add utility to your code. Yeah. So let me give you an example function. And the two main functions we've been working with already are the main function, which you guys have seen very often, as well as the system.out.println function. The println function is something I've been using a long time. Now, this code, I will explain it to you. Basically, public. Now, just to make things clear, here let me copy this in. Let me copy this in. And okay, let me. You guys don't have to have public there. I'm sorry. Here, let me just. Okay. Let's look at these two functions. We have the main function, right? The one that runs at the very beginning, and we also have this addition function. All it does is it takes in these two inputs and prints out the sum of those two inputs. Now, how do we use this function? And it's a public function. Okay, I haven't gone over this before. Public, all it means is it's accessible by all the files inside of your folder. When you remember, we created a control project at the very beginning. That project is just a folder or on your computer somewhere, right? Right? And this public function, this public word, all it means is this function can be used by anything, any file in this in our project, right? We're going to create a public function, a function that's accessible by every file in the project, and that will make more sense later on when we work with multiple files. It'll be crazy. And static means basically our class can use it. It just means our entire class can use it. And now void, the word, the keyword, these are called keywords, the things that are before this, the name of the function. I named our function add. The keyword that comes before is called the return type. Now again, I told you, our function takes in inputs, right? Two inputs, integer a and integer b, and gives you an output. Now, what is that output? Well, like when we name a variable, before we type the name of the variable, we say the data type of the variable. We say string my name is equal to Luke. But when we have a function, it's the same thing. It's what we're going to return. Let's say it's an integer, right? Then we have the name of our function and the inputs. And our function, it does whatever's inside. It prints out the sum of the two numbers. Now, what if we don't care about returning something? What if we don't care about putting out an output? We just want to write something to the screen. We just want to print something. Then all you do is type in, instead of integer before add, you type in void. Void means if you put it before the name of your function, it just means I don't want to print anything. I don't want to return anything. Now, what if we want to? And you usually do that when you want your function to just print something out. So now that was a lot to unpack, let's go into the main part of the code, the main function, the first thing that runs when your code runs, when you run your code. The first thing it does is it adds 5 and 12. So what that does is it takes in this number and this number, and it puts it inside this add function's a and b variable. Again, because I'm taking two inputs, an integer a and an integer b, when I say add 5 and 12, it stores 5 in a, the variable a, and then 12 I can't click, 12 inside b. So now it runs the add function, when you say the add function, it goes straight to this. This is called a constructor. It goes straight to the, or not a constructor. I think it's called, yeah, it's called a constructor. It goes straight to this, basically the definition, the blueprint of our add function. It goes to this little blueprint of our add function, and it adds those two numbers and prints them out. Now, what if all I want the add function to do is return the sum of those two? Let me see if my notes make it a little clearer. Yeah. Okay, you have your key. Yeah, okay. Let me just go back to constructing functions. How do you make a function? Well, a little bit of information before that. System.out.println, the function we've been using for a while, it's a function that we've borrowed from the standard Java library. Now, what is that? What is the standard Java library? Now, when you download Java or the Java development kit, it gives you a bunch of functions you can use. It gives you the main function. It gives you the if and the else if and the while and the for loop. All of those are inside the standard Java library. It just means the things that you can do without having to download anything else. But what if we want to make our own functions? They have the system.out.println function. What if we want to make our own? Well, then, right above the main function or below the main function, we say our keywords, right? Our keywords, public static, void or whatever, or public static, and then we have our return data type. Because we're not returning anything, we write void, but if you want to return an integer, you have it type return int, you type int there, and then the name of your function and the number of arguments, or the list of your arguments. And you have the opening and closing brackets. Now, our arguments, all they are is what we want to use inside our function. It's whatever we put inside these parentheses, it's what our function will put inside variables that have the same name. So, returning stuff. Let me show you what that looks like. What if we want to return something? Let's say we want to return an int. Then, all we have to do is inside of our curly brackets, we type in return and then a plus b. Now that means if we say add 5 and 12, this number instantly becomes 17, right? So how will we use that? We can say integer sum, create a whole new variable that takes in both of these arguments, right? It will take in whatever the add function returns to us. So when you say this, imagine, just like close your eyes and imagine that this number, all this is, this function call, when I say this function, all it is 17. They're the exact same thing. That's what returning is. It replaces that add 5 and 12 with whatever it returned, 17. So now, to show you that works, I hope this works. Or, what am I, not, print sum. And remember, we can print variables. That's why it's so important. When this prints, it should print 17 because that's what returned. That was what was returned in our add function. Now, if this doesn't run, okay. You guys might be asking, oh, why is it running, Luke, for you new viewers? The stream is taking up so much of my internet that it won't return anything. It won't actually print to the console. But you will see that it prints out 17. So yeah, I'm sorry the console's not working today, but we will keep moving anyways. And so you see here, I don't have to actually put add 5 and 12 into a variable, sum. I could just print it out directly. And look, I have comments here, adding clarity to your code from the previous lesson. You want to, I'm creating a function that returns an integer, and it takes 2 integers as inputs. Which means when I say this function, add 5 and 12, it'll take 5, put it inside A, and then take 12 and put it inside B. And then it will return A and B, which means when I say add 5 and 12, it'll instantly replace itself with 17, because that's what 5 plus 12 is. And then another line of code, another comment. It adds 2 numbers using the add function, and then prints out that sum. Yeah, the sum. So, using functions is super important. because this is how we're going to be taking in and outputting data. Yeah, this is just a review. If we want our function to spit something out, we say before the name of the function what data type we want it to spit out. And if we want it, let's say we're adding two things, that means we're going to return an integer. Sometimes you might want to return a string, or a float, or a boolean. And then we just say return, and then whatever we want it to return inside the parentheses. Now, our main function, why does our main function have void? It's because our main function, we don't want it to return anything. If it's the first thing that runs, and that means there's no functions that are using it, and there's nothing to return. Now we just want it to run, and that if you just want it to run, you don't return anything. Now let's look at a complicated thing. It's called scope. Scope, all it means is if you imagine, looking down at a scope. Let's say you're looking at a satellite telescope, right? A satellite telescope, and you're looking down on the Earth. Now, we have really accurate satellite telescopes nowadays, but you inside that telescope, you won't be able to see what's going on inside of a house. Now, if you change scopes and look at just a camera that's inside of a house, that scope can look inside what's going on in the house. So let's try this code. Let's try this code, actually. Well, yeah, better than me explaining it. Let's just try this code. Here, let me refresh Codiva. Okay. Let me just get rid of that. I will show you guys what I mean by scope. Look at my little comments. Okay, let's run this. Stream is taxing on my internet, so it won't even print it out. But if you do go on to codiva.io and you try this code out, why doesn't it work? Well, let's see here. If 1 is less than 2, that's true. So it'll do whatever's inside here, right? It'll say my num equals 3, right? We created a variable. Now the problem is we created this variable inside of this if function. It's on a smaller scope, which means if we try to use that in the outer scope, it won't work. That's like we created we set a number inside of our house, right? And here we're trying to look at that number using a satellite. Obviously, using a satellite. It won't be able to see that number because it's created inside of this if scope. So every time you use curly brackets, you're creating a new scope. You're saying this is like a little separated piece from the rest of the code. I'm not enforcing like a break time rule or break times. I will try my best. I will finish this up scope and then we will take a break. So yeah, why didn't it work? It's because inside the if, it's a different scope, which means anything you create inside there can't really be used or seen by anything outside of that scope. So yeah, my analogy here that I forgot to use, it's like Inception, the movie Inception. When you're on whenever you're outside, whenever you're outside of a dream, right? There's like a bunch of layers, right? Whenever you're on the outer layer, you can't affect anything that's on the inside layer. You can't see what someone's dreaming. You can't affect their dream unless you go into their dream. So yeah. The main function, we call it the global scope. We call it the global scope because everything is seen and edited. Now, if you go into a curly brackets, you enter a local scope. That's what we call these things, global and local scope. Basically, all it is global is the outer scope, and local is the inside scope, inside. I have a bunch of text here. Honestly, most of it is just blabbering on. All I'm trying to say is don't repeat variable names. That's all I'm trying to say. Don't make the same named variable in several places. You want to avoid that as much as possible. Here's the correct way to use scopes. Here's the correct way to declare things. Instead of... Here, let me go into... this. Instead of saying in here my number is 1 and then printing my number, you say int my num equals 0 or anything like a filler number. Then you replace it in here without the data type. You replace it, you change it, and that will actually affect the global. All I'm trying to say is declare your variables first, edit them throughout your code or into local scopes or other scopes, and then work with them later on. Okay. Yes. So this way, we will always have a number to print, even if the Boolean is false. Even if the if statement doesn't go off, we'll always have something to print. You have to always make sure you have something to print, something to fill the variable. All right, so let's review. Functions, they're made by having keywords, the return data type, which means what you want to spit out, what type of data type you want to spit out with that function, and then a function name and the arguments, as well as whatever you want to put inside. And they're used by writing the function name and the parentheses, whatever you want to put inside that function. Now make sure when you're declaring things in the global, make sure you declare things in the global scope instead of just declaring them in the local scope. All that means is make sure you declare your variables first. Make sure you do that first and not inside if statements or curly brackets. I have some example problems for you, and I only have one because this one's kind of complicated. Write a function that adds two numbers together, and prints the result. And you're going to use this function to print the first 5 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. Now, if you don't remember what the Fibonacci sequence is, the Fibonacci sequence is made by taking, like you start with 2 numbers, 0 and 1, and each number afterwards will equal the sum of the 2 numbers before it. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Now the 2 numbers before that are 1 and 1. So the next number is 2. Then it goes to 3 because 1 plus 2 is 3. Then it goes to 5. And then 8. So if you started with 1 and 1, then it would go to here. Basically, I want you to take these, I want you to design a function and then use that function to print the first 5 numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. So I will pause. You can go ahead and pause the video now, try this out yourself, or you can just wait for me to do it, and I will show you how. Pause the video now. All right, you're back. So let's go ahead and try this out yourself. And to repeat again, I do not do these beforehand, so that means you will see me solve them actively, or whatever. I don't know why the spacing is weird. Okay, so let's start out by making our function. We're going to make a static function and it'll return an integer, right? So int add will take in 2 numbers, int a and int b. So right here, we have our keyword static, which means our class can use it. Then we have the return data type, which means our add function will give you back an integer. It will return an integer. Now we have the function name, add. That's how we're going to call this function. And we have 2 arguments, int a and int b. And simply, we're going to return a plus b. So now, here's the complicated part. We have to have it print out the first 5 terms of the Fibonacci sequence. So, okay, yeah, let's store them in numbers. So we will have number 1, num1. We're going to set them all to 0 first, and we're going to declare these in the global scope, which just means we're going to declare them right here, right inside the main function. Int num3 equals 0. Int num4 equals 0. And int num5 equals 0. Now this isn't the most efficient way to do it because we don't have as many tools as I would like yet, but that's okay. And I think these have an extra tab. Yeah, they do have an extra tab. No wonder. Okay, they've been tabbed around this whole time. It doesn't matter. The spacing doesn't matter. It just looks nice. So, our first two numbers are actually very important. The first two numbers, we have to set them to the first two numbers of a Fibonacci sequence. And you could just, if you cheated, you could just write out the first five terms anyways, without even using the add function. But that's not fun, is it? Let's set these all to 0 and get them, except for the first two, and get them to equal the first 5 numbers. Did I tab wrong? I don't even know anymore. Okay, so we're gonna make our third number, right? Actually, instead of using 0, okay, yeah, we're gonna get our third number to equal the sum of num1 and num2. And I didn't really go over this in my lesson, and I really should have, but you can put in variables inside functions as the arguments or the inputs, and it just takes the number 0 and puts in A, and then it takes the number 1 and puts in B. And using variables as function inputs is super important. So you don't have to write 0 and then 1. Like, let's say you change the first two numbers. You don't have to change that every time. You could just type in num1 and num2. Now, number 4, that will equal the sum, or add, of num2, number 2, and num3, number 3. You could do the same here. Num3, oh wow, 3, and num4. Now, using my function, I just got us the first 5 terms. I declared the first 2 terms, which you just need. That's just how you start a Fibonacci sequence. And then I added them up. Wait, actually, does the Fibonacci sequence start with 1 and 1? I want to pretend it doesn't. Okay, I want to pretend it doesn't, and it just starts with 0 and 1. Either way, you can actually change these, and it'll move the Fibonacci sequence depending on where you started. All it does is it takes the first 2 numbers, adds them up using my add function, and then because it spits out the sum of those, I just have num3 equal the sum of those 2 numbers. Yes. And now you could, because our add function is super simple, you could just get rid of the add function and have them sum up. Now, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I just add them together here? Because our add function is so simple, right? Why didn't we just do it there? Well, we have to prepare for when our functions do insane, massive calculations that will take up a bunch of lines of code. And so, because we have to prepare for that, we have to get used to calling functions, putting inputs into the function name, right? The parentheses next to the function name. We have to get used to using that in order to code bigger projects later on. And so my time is almost done, which means if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask them in the comments below, or at my email, oneupmhs@gmail.com, or on the Google Classroom if you're added to that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.